All Souls Day. Time to visit the graves of our departed loved ones. My father had injured his leg in a drunken stumble last night, so the task of visiting Grandma Quarrington's grave fell to me. Grandma had passed away years ago, her final resting place somewhere on this hillside. Back then, the graves didn't even have headstones. I could only rely on my hazy memories to find it. Between two trees, this must be it. I dropped the bag of offerings on the ground and knelt down, bowing my head repeatedly. Grandma, if you can hear me from the beyond, please help me find a handsome boyfriend. After rambling on about various things, that was the crux of it all. For years at university and 1 year since graduation, I hadn't had a single boyfriend. Even the neighbor's tomcat was starting to look dashing to me. However, it seemed Grandma might have actually heard my plea. As I straightened up after paying my respects, a figure appeared in my line of sight. Male, tall with long legs, broad shoulders, and a slim waist. That face was absolutely striking. The handsome stranger approached slowly, looking confused. "Why, are you bowing at my grandfather's grave?" I froze. "Your grandfather?" I asked. "Yes," he replied. The young man bent down to pull out some weeds from the grave. Seeming to guess my thoughts, he chuckled softly, "Wrong grave?" I didn't respond, carefully looking around, feeling a bit unfamiliar with the surroundings. I quickly apologized and fled with my belongings. After driving around the small hill, I returned. It seemed correct, didn't it? Looking at the handsome figure in the distance by the grave, I confusedly took out my phone and sent a panoramic video to my father. "Is this it?" Dad replied instantly, "Yes, absolutely correct." "Who's that by Grandma's grave?" "Her grandson-in-law?" His eyesight was quite good. I didn't reply, put away my phone and carried my things over again. "Excuse me," I approached him to say hello, "it seems you might be at the wrong grave." He paused for a moment, looked around, then took out his phone and recorded a video, probably also seeking confirmation from his family. A minute later, his phone vibrated once. The handsome man glanced at it, immediately furrowed his brow, then looked at me a bit awkwardly. "I'm so sorry." He pointed at my bag of items. "Could I buy these from you?" I stared at his face, lost in thought, reacting a bit slowly. "No need, you can have them. You've already burned them for my grandmother anyway." The handsome man seemed to think this made sense, muttered a thanks, and left with the bag. Watching the car drive away, I suddenly regretted it. Stupid me, I could have used that as an excuse to ask for his WhatsApp. The wind had scattered almost everything in front of the gravestone. I knelt down and started banging my head on the ground again. "Grandma, please bless me once more. Help us develop our relationship, will you?" Of course, Grandma Quarrington wouldn't respond. The only response was the gentle breeze blowing across the hillside. After paying my respects, I prepared to get in the car and leave. However, I got in, turned the key. Nothing happened. My dad's new car, only 6 months old, had inexplicably broken down. Glancing at the nearby graves, a chill ran down my spine. I hurriedly tried again. Still, the engine wouldn't start. My heart sank. Just as I was about to call my dad, a black sedan approached from the distance. I quickly ran to the roadside and waved to flag it down. As the window rolled down, my heart suddenly began to race. It was him again. At that moment, I started to believe that Grandma Quarrington was watching over me from heaven. I had asked for a grandson-in-law, and she immediately arranged one for me. "My car won't start. Could you take a look at it for me?" I wrapped my coat tightly around myself, trying to appear as delicate and pitiful as possible. But in the half-lowered window, I caught a glimpse of my reflection. The tight-fitting coat made me look like a round ball. I instantly let go of it. The handsome stranger was very helpful. But it was no use. The car stubbornly refused to start, no matter what we tried. The sky began to drizzle again, and there was nothing for it but to have my father call for a tow truck. As dark clouds gradually obscured the sun, casting a gloomy pall over the small hill dotted with graves, I started to feel a bit uneasy. "Would you mind waiting with me for a bit? My dad says he's arranging a tow truck right away." The handsome stranger furrowed his brow, not quite understanding. So I carefully explained that the overcast sky, the rain, and the graveyard were making me a bit nervous. His attractive brow finally relaxed, and he nodded in agreement. He parked the car by the roadside, and I opened the door to sit in the back seat, starting to bombard my father with WhatsApp messages. My father's replies were rather perfunctory. "I know, princess. The tow truck will be there soon. Let my future son-in-law keep you company for now." Bored in the car, the handsome stranger put on some soft music and tried to make conversation. "Are you from around here?" "Yes," I nodded eagerly. "I was born and raised here until I went to Westminster for university and stayed there to work after graduation." Surprisingly, so was he. Except he went to university in York, then moved to Westminster after graduating. My interest was immediately piqued. "Which school did you go to?" "Royal York School." "Me too." Under my persistent questioning, I discovered we had not only attended the same school but were in the same year. When I asked his name, he replied, "Wilfred Quarrington." Wilfred Quarrington? The name sounded so familiar. After pondering for a moment, I asked hesitantly, "Is Aubrey Quarrington your?" He gazed at me through the rearview mirror, his eyes curved in a gentle, attractive arc. "My grandfather." I think I knew who he was now. The grandson of my high school maths teacher, Aubrey Quarrington. I vaguely remembered how, back in school, when the maths teacher angrily berated me, saying that a girl as lazy and rebellious as me would never find a husband when I grew up. I had tilted my chin up defiantly and retorted, "Then when I grow up, I'll marry your grandson, bully him every day, beat up your great-grandchildren, and make you miserable." That long ago jest now reflected in those almond-shaped eyes in the rearview mirror. How utterly mortifying. I sat in the back seat, dazed for quite a while. Until Wilfred Quarrington in the front seat spoke absently, "My grandfather often mentions you." "Oh, does he?" I laughed awkwardly, while thinking to myself, I nearly drove him to death back then. Whenever he had to teach my class, the old gentleman had to carry nitroglycerin tablets with him. Of course he would mention me often. With a forced smile, I politely said, I should visit him one of these days. After all, his grave should be up there too, possibly even neighboring my grandmother's. Wilfred paused for a moment, then smiled and said, "That would be nice." Another silence followed. Later, the tow truck my father had called finally arrived slowly. I breathed a sigh of relief and quickly said goodbye as I got out of the car. However, this time I didn't forget to ask for his WhatsApp. As for the reason, I said I'd visit Mr. Quarrington Sr. one day. Wilfred added me on WhatsApp without hesitation and reminded me to call him if anything happened on my way home. True to form for that old-fashioned gentleman's grandson, upright, considerate, and handsome to boot. That evening, after much deliberation, I sent Wilfred Quarrington a WhatsApp message, politely suggesting we meet for lunch tomorrow. However, I was turned down. Wilfred apologized, saying he had plans tomorrow, and suggested we could meet up when we're back in Westminster. I understood. In the adult world, anything short of a clear yes is essentially a no. Feeling dejected, I crawled into bed, only to feel as if I'd barely closed my eyes before my dad yanked me out from under the covers. Was it morning already? I could have sworn I'd just shut my eyes. He dragged me into the bathroom and forcefully shoved a toothbrush with toothpaste into my hand. "Wash up, put on your makeup, you're going on a blind date," my dad spat out through gritted teeth. It was 9 a.m., and I sat by the window in the cafe. I was supposed to be waiting for my blind date, but my mind was filled with thoughts of Wilfred's face. If only I had known he would grow up to be so handsome, I might have agreed to that arrangement with Grandpa Quarrington years ago. Lost in thought, I heard the glass door open behind me as someone entered. I turned to look and froze in shock. Wilfred? My eyes scanned his face before traveling downwards. I was dumbfounded. What on earth was he wearing? A leopard print shirt, tight black trousers, and loafers. As I stared in disbelief, Wilfred caught sight of me. Our eyes met, and he hesitated for a moment before turning to leave. "Wilfred!" I shouted, quickly running over to grab his sleeve. Looking him up and down, I recalled his polite refusal last night and suddenly understood. "Are you here for a blind date?" Wilfred paused. "Are you as well?" I nodded slowly, my heart leaping with joy. Then, I dragged a stiff Wilfred to the table, his face flushing to the tips of his ears. I gazed at his garish leopard print shirt with an amused smile. "So, you dress like this on purpose to avoid the date?" "Yes." Wilfred gripped his water glass tightly. "I'm not very good at rejecting women, so I thought she might call it off herself if I looked ridiculous." I couldn't help but laugh. As I was daydreaming about how to win over Wilfred Quarrington, the glass door opened once again. Someone walked in, looking travel-worn. I focused my gaze and was instantly stunned. Opal? My cousin Opal Mills was strikingly beautiful with a domineering personality, and had been my arch-nemesis for years. To encounter her at a blind date, what rotten luck. She stood at the entrance, scanning the room until her gaze fixed on Wilfred's back. As she approached, I frowned deeply. Was she here to steal my man again? It wouldn't be the first time she'd done such a thing. My first boyfriend suddenly began to give me the cold shoulder and then completely disappeared. In the end, I found him in my cousin's bed. At this moment, my cousin walked straight to the table, not even glancing at me. She took out her phone and compared it with Wilfred. "You're Wilfred Quarrington, right? I'm the one your aunt arranged for this blind date." Across the table, Wilfred was also taken aback. Just then, another person entered the cafe. It was a slightly balding, chubby man wearing a black coat. He looked around, then headed straight for me, tightly grasping my hand, his palm clammy with sweat. "Clarice Sunderland, right? I'm sorry I'm late." I was dumbfounded. Grandma Quarrington's matchmaking skills were clearly amateur. She had sent a man my way, but it was the wrong one. Before I could recover, the actual blind date dragged me to a nearby table. As we sat down, I glanced over at Wilfred Quarrington. The usually aloof academic was now sitting stiffly, wearing a garish leopard print shirt that made him look extremely uncomfortable. Meanwhile, the man across from me launched into an enthusiastic self-introduction. He was overly eager, so I felt obliged to politely respond with my own details. I tried to convince myself not to judge by appearances, thinking perhaps he had some redeeming qualities. But after a brief exchange, I couldn't find any virtues, though he certainly tried to take advantage. When he attempted to rub my leg with his foot under the table, I couldn't hold back. I threw my cup of English breakfast tea at him. As I stood to leave, I passed by Wilfred and caught sight of his miserable expression. My heart softened, and I decided to help him out. I gestured for Wilfred to stand, then linked my arm through his. Turning to face the others, I plastered on a smile. "I'm so sorry, Opal, but you're a bit late this time. Wilfred is actually my boyfriend. I only came to this blind date because we had a tiff, but now." I leaned my whole body against Wilfred, surprised to feel him stiffen slightly. Opal was stunned. Her pretty face contorted with anger. Unfortunately for her, I didn't give her a chance to react. I immediately left the cafe, arm in arm with Wilfred. As we left the cafe, Wilfred Quarrington quietly thanked me, looking visibly relieved. At his invitation, I accompanied him to buy some new clothes to change into. The man was a natural clothes horse, even in simple white shirt and black trousers, he still stood out. While I was pondering how to take our relationship to the next level, Wilfred suddenly stared at me thoughtfully. "Could you do me a favor?" he asked. "What is it?" I replied. For a moment, my mind raced with possibilities, but I never expected him to ask me to pretend to be his girlfriend to appease his family. I agreed without hesitation. After all, Professor Quarrington was no longer around, and his family didn't know me. Besides, this was a perfect opportunity to get closer to him. With our holiday time limited and our return to Westminster scheduled for tomorrow, we decided to set off today after a brief discussion. Right now. We bought some vitamins at the nearby shopping center, then Wilfred drove me to his family home. On the way, while waiting at a red light, Wilfred rested one hand on the steering wheel and glanced at me. "Nervous?" he asked. I shook my head, speaking honestly. "It's not real, so why worry?" Wilfred smiled. The next moment, his voice blended with the car's music, barely audible. "What if it becomes real in the future?" My mind went blank. I turned this simple sentence over in my head countless times. And then, I really did start to feel nervous. As he raised his hand to knock on the door, my legs went weak. Wilfred, quick to react, swiftly wrapped his arm around my waist to steady me. Wilfred looked down at me, a smirk playing on his lips. His eyes twinkled with amusement. Scared? I stubbornly shook my head, but before I could utter a word, he chuckled. Too late now. With that, Wilfred raised his hand and knocked on the door. I instantly pushed his hand away, tensing up. I straightened my back, pressed my legs together, and tried my best to appear poised and elegant. However, all my pretenses crumbled the moment I saw who opened the door. An elderly gentleman stood in the doorway, his face wreathed in smiles, appearing kind and genial. But this warmth vanished the instant he laid eyes on me. He froze, the smile slowly fading from his face. Clarice? I stood there, dumbfounded, unable to speak. Hadn't Wilfred said his grandfather had passed away? They'd even visited his grave on Remembrance Day. I slowly turned to look at Wilfred, only to see him take my hand, smiling at his grandfather. Grandpa, you've been mentioning Clarice so often. I've brought her back to you. As your granddaughter-in-law. Grandpa Quarrington stared at me for a long moment before reluctantly stepping aside to let us in, grumbling, "Come in then." As we passed by the old man, I faintly heard him scolding Wilfred in a low voice. Bringing this little troublemaker back, are you trying to send your grandfather to an early grave? But when I looked up at the source of the voice, I caught a glimpse of Grandpa Quarrington's slightly upturned lips. I entered the house nervously, my mind in turmoil. But then, I had a second thought. It was Grandpa Quarrington who had been infuriated by me several times before. If anyone should be anxious, it should be him. Realizing this, I relaxed a bit. As I stepped inside, an elderly lady wearing an apron hurried out of the kitchen, still holding a spatula. Her smile was incredibly warm. This must be Wilfred's grandmother. "Come in, dear, have a seat," she said. "Wilfred just called to say you love roast beef and fish and chips. I've just been to the market, and they'll be ready soon." I was taken aback. How did Wilfred know my favorite dishes? Lost in thought, Grandma Quarrington asked Grandpa and Wilfred to keep me company in the living room. Grandpa Quarrington obediently agreed, though his face remained stern. I sat on the sofa, trying to calm myself, and then looked up with a forced smile. "Wilfred, your grandmother seems so kind. She looks gentle and caring." Wilfred paused, then smiled without saying a word. Though he remained silent, Grandpa Quarrington picked up the conversation. "Are you implying that I have a bad temper?" I took a sip of the warm water Wilfred handed me. "Of course not. Grandpa, I'm not implying anything." Grandpa Quarrington spat out his tea. Wiping himself with a napkin, Grandpa Quarrington couldn't help but laugh. "After all these years, your tongue is still as sharp as ever." I smiled politely and said, "Professor Quarrington, you're as distinguished as ever." Back when Grandpa used to teach, he held a high position at the school but never threw his weight around. He often joked with us and was close to all the students. "All right," Grandpa Quarrington waved his hand dismissively. "No need for flattery. Tell me, how did you end up ensnaring my precious grandson?" I was stunned and turned to look at Wilfred. This step wasn't part of the plan. Catching my pleading glance, Wilfred quickly picked up the conversation for me. "Back in school, whenever you scolded her, she'd come and take it out on me," Wilfred said, sitting on the sofa in the white shirt I'd just helped him buy. With 2 buttons undone, he fabricated the story with a straight face. "After all that bullying, we couldn't help but fall for each other after graduation." I nearly choked on my own saliva. What on earth was he on about? While I was still in shock, Grandpa Quarrington had already started counting on his fingers. "Blimey, how many years have you two been carrying on this secret affair?" My mouth, always quicker than my brain, cheerfully replied, "We were just worried the news might be too shocking for you to handle. After all, I've already fulfilled half of my childhood vow." Hearing this, Grandpa Quarrington narrowed his eyes, his focus shifting to the latter part of my statement. "What's that? Are you still planning to smack my great-grandchildren in the future?" The old man's memory was surprisingly good. After all these years, he still remembered that passionate declaration I'd made as a child. After chatting for a bit, Grandpa Quarrington got up and went to the loo. The moment the bathroom door closed, I could faintly hear him humming a tune inside. It seemed the old chap was in quite a good mood. Left alone in the living room with Wilfred, I tugged at his sleeve and asked the question that had been bothering me the most. "Didn't you say your grandfather had passed away?" Wilfred chuckled softly. "That was my maternal grandfather. He was quite traditional in his preference for boys, but my grandmother couldn't have any more children due to health issues, so my mum was their only daughter. As far back as I can remember, my maternal grandfather always encouraged me to call him Grandpa too. He was stubborn about it, and the family thought it was just a matter of what to call him, so they didn't argue. That's why I've always called him that. So that's how it was." When the door had opened earlier, my heart had nearly leapt out of my chest. The living room was extremely quiet. As the old man hadn't come out for a while, the atmosphere grew a bit awkward. I tugged at Wilfred's sleeve again, trying to make conversation. "Just now, why did you say all that?" As our eyes met, Wilfred's lips curled into a smile. "What I said before was more or less true." Well, that was correct. Back then, when Grandpa Quarrington had scolded me harshly, I would secretly take it out on Wilfred. Like quietly letting the air out of his bicycle tires or tossing rubbish into his desk cubby. But I had always done it behind his back. How did he know? The confusion must have been evident in my eyes because before I could ask, Wilfred voluntarily explained. "Actually, I knew it was you every time. You've always been careless. Either my classmates saw you, or I saw you, or you left your student ID on my seat." Wilfred rubbed his brow, looking exasperated. It would have been harder for me not to know. I was utterly shocked. All these years, I had believed my secret acts of revenge were flawlessly executed. Turns out, I had been exposed long ago. Moreover, back then, Wilfred had been a bit tanned, always wearing black-framed glasses, with slightly longer hair that partially covered his brows and eyes. It was hard to leave a deep impression of his appearance. But now, I glanced at him, his profile so handsome it made my knees weak. As my knees weakened, so did my hand, and the glass of water I had just picked up wobbled, spilling warm water onto Wilfred's leg beside me. I let out a startled cry, instinctively grabbing a tissue to wipe it off. However, it wasn't until the tissue was already pressed against his leg that I realized. This position was a bit awkward. Even more awkward was that the moment my hand froze with the tissue hovering above, Grandpa Quarrington suddenly emerged from the bathroom without a sound. The old gentleman was as silent as ever, his footsteps making no sound. I felt so embarrassed that I wanted the ground to swallow me up. So, I tossed the tissue at Wilfred, saying, "Clean yourself up. It's just a bit of water on you. It's not proper for a girl like me to help you wipe it off." After speaking, I sat up straight and discreetly put some distance between us. Wilfred held the tissue, looking dazed. I stole a glance at him. Handsome men are truly handsome, even the hint of innocence in his eyes was captivating. I started to feel a bit guilty again. However, at that moment, Grandma Quarrington came out with a spatula, asking if I had any dietary restrictions. I responded quickly and hurried into the kitchen to help. At first, Grandma Quarrington kept trying to shoo me out of the kitchen, but eventually gave in when she couldn't persuade me. While I was helping in the kitchen, Grandma Quarrington told me many things about Wilfred. For instance, after his parents' divorce, his mother remarried, and his father, consumed by work, rarely came home. She also mentioned that when Wilfred was in school, he had a secret crush on a girl. He filled notebook after notebook with diary entries about her but never showed them to anyone. Grandma Quarrington turned to look at me, her eyes twinkling with amusement. "My dear, I knew the moment I saw you. You must be the girl he fancied back in school." I was stunned for a couple of seconds, then pretended to be shy and said nothing. But in reality, my heart felt a twinge of sadness. Grandma Quarrington had no idea that Wilfred and I had barely spoken to each other during our school days. The girl who had inspired this top student to fill notebook after notebook with his thoughts couldn't possibly have been me. Overall, the dinner ended on a very satisfactory note. Of course, that was despite Grandpa Quarrington's deliberately stern face throughout the meal. I had been worried that the old man might hold a grudge and not accept me as his granddaughter-in-law. Until I accidentally overheard Grandma Quarrington whispering to him, "You old fool, weren't you always going on about this student of yours? Now she's our granddaughter-in-law, and you're still frowning. Give me a smile." For the rest of the evening, Grandpa Quarrington wore a stiff smile on his face. Even as he saw me off, the old man was still forcing a smile, his eyes betraying his true feelings as he said softly, "Goodbye." Then he closed the front door. Wilfred and I exchanged a glance, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. The holiday ended quickly. Although I had helped him deal with the two elderly relatives pressuring him to marry. Once we returned to Westminster, we both threw ourselves into our busy work schedules and rarely contacted each other. We would only occasionally wish each other good morning or good night, with no further communication. Until one day, as I was leaving work and had just stepped out of the company lift, I received a call from Wilfred. Surprised, I quickly answered. To my surprise, Wilfred Quarrington had asked me to accompany him shopping, to help him choose a gift for his female boss. On the phone, his voice was slightly hesitant. For the last project, my boss helped me quite a bit. I'd like to get her a gift to show my appreciation, but I'm not very good at choosing presents for women. Before he could finish, I eagerly agreed. Half an hour later, we met at the agreed shopping center. It had been about 2 weeks since I'd last seen Wilfred, and he seemed to have lost some weight. He walked quickly towards me, but paused for a few seconds before speaking. In the end, he just quietly said thanks. I waved it off and got straight to the important information. How old is your boss? Early 50s, I'm not entirely sure. I breathed a sigh of relief. Thank goodness, she was in her 50s, not some attractive, wealthy woman in her early 30s with an interest in young men. I started dragging Wilfred around the shopping center, helping him choose a gift. As we passed a jewelry shop, my attention was drawn to a necklace in the window display. It was exquisitely crafted, with a unique design, every detail perfectly matching my aesthetic taste. But when I glanced at the price tag, it was just over £400. In this city, for the wealthy, that amount might be nothing more than the cost of a meal, but for a poor soul like me, it was decidedly expensive. So, after lingering for a few seconds, I discreetly looked away. After browsing for a while, we finally settled on a perfume. The fragrance was fresh and subtle, unlikely to offend, and rather exclusive. Wilfred said that although his boss was over 50, she was efficient and decisive at work, and quite sophisticated in her personal life. Moreover, when Wilfred and his colleagues had visited her home, she seemed to have a collection of various perfumes. Having chosen the gift, Wilfred insisted on treating me to dinner as a thank you. We ended up at a teppanyaki restaurant in the shopping center. There was a queue, so we sat outside waiting for a table. Wilfred went to the loo. When he returned, Wilfred had an elegantly wrapped shopping bag in his hand, which he held out to me. "Open it and see," he said. I looked up, somewhat taken aback, but took it and opened it. Inside was a jewelry box, and in the box was an exquisitely crafted necklace. It was the very one I had gazed at for those extra few moments earlier. My heart inexplicably began to race. Wilfred Quarrington stood by the chair, leaning down to look at me. "You seemed to like it quite a bit just now." I held the necklace, struggling to regain my composure. Finally, I looked up at him silently. "Is this a confession gift?" As soon as the words left my mouth, I regretted them again. I've always been one to speak before thinking. Wilfred's ears turned red at my question. He said softly, "Consider it a thank you gift for accompanying me home to put on an act and helping me choose a present." I mulled over his words several times in my mind, vaguely understanding that this response was equivalent to a denial. A denial of my foolish question just now. My heart sank halfway, and I snapped out of my previous shock and delight. I glanced at the necklace in the box, closed the lid, and stood up. "This is too expensive. I can't accept it. I'll go with you to return it." Wilfred froze for a moment, saying nothing. Instead, he snatched my bag, opened it, and stuffed the box inside. Before I could react, he tore up the receipt right in front of me. I was dumbfounded. What kind of domineering CEO move was this? "It's a gift for you. Please accept it." "I've torn up the receipt, so it can't be returned now." Wilfred's lips curled into a slight smile. His tone was gentle, yet left no room for argument. I stared blankly at the shredded pieces in his palm. If there's a payment record, it should still be possible to return it. I paid in cash. As I was still in a daze, it was finally our turn in the queue. Wilfred smiled and lightly placed his palm on my shoulder. Come on, it's our turn now. When it came time to order, Wilfred Quarrington chivalrously handed me the menu, but my mind was preoccupied with the question of whether to keep the necklace or not. I had no interest in choosing food. I pushed the menu back to him. As Wilfred ordered, I wasn't paying attention until the waiter left with the menu. I then took the necklace out of my bag and placed it on the table. How about this? I'll transfer the money to you, I said. Across from me, Wilfred's brow furrowed slightly. I continued, but I have to pay rent next month, and I'm a bit short on cash. Can I transfer it to you in installments? For some reason, upon hearing the word installments, Wilfred's eyebrows raised a fraction. After a moment's consideration, he agreed readily. I breathed a sigh of relief. I didn't want Wilfred to think I was the kind of woman who was greedy and lustful, although, truthfully, the latter was accurate. When the food arrived, I was surprised. Although Wilfred had ordered everything, it unexpectedly suited my taste. After dinner, Wilfred insisted on paying the bill. I mentioned feeling a bit stuffed, so he accompanied me for a stroll in the square outside the shopping center. We had barely taken a few steps when we encountered a young girl carrying a basket of flowers. Sir, your girlfriend is so pretty. Why don't you buy her a flower? May your love last forever, she said. I felt a bit awkward. These academic types are usually quite direct, I thought. He'll probably refuse outright. But Wilfred didn't say whether he'd buy or not. Instead, he bent down, hands on his knees, and gently asked her, "Little sister, how old are you?" "I'm 13, the girl answered brightly. Wilfred smiled. He patted her head and asked, "Do you have a QR code?" After the girl produced a QR code card, Wilfred inquired about the price, his tone gentle. "I'll buy them all. It's getting late, you should head home soon." The girl was delighted. After receiving the payment, she carefully handed the flowers to me and whispered by my side, "Miss, your boyfriend is handsome and kind. You're so lucky." With that, she waved at us with a smile and skipped away. I stood there holding a bunch of flowers, glancing down at them. They were beautiful, indeed. But the lucky one wasn't me. This guy was so difficult to figure out, I wasn't sure if I'd ever be fortunate enough to be with him. It was the weekend, and I was lazily lounging in bed when I suddenly received a call from Wilfred Quarrington. In an instant, my drowsiness vanished, and I sat bolt upright. There was a brief pause on the other end before he spoke. "Did I wake you?" "No, not at all," I hastily cleared my throat, fibbing, "I'm not one for lions. Just got back from a morning jog, feeling a bit knackered is all." I heard Wilfred's low chuckle through the phone. "There's something I need your help with," he said. "Go on," I replied. "My grandfather's come to Westminster." My fingers gripping the phone stiffened slightly. Surely the old chap hadn't come to supervise our relationship? "So, you'd like me to join you for dinner with your grandfather, is that it?" I ventured. Wilfred sighed over the phone. "Grandpa's planning to stay for a week." "And?" I asked, puzzled. "Well, I'm afraid I'll have to trouble you to stay over for the week as well." Wilfred's voice was low, making his words sound oddly intimate. I was stunned for a moment, then suddenly remembered. When I'd visited his home before, I'd noticed how easily Wilfred got flustered. To tease him, I'd told his grandparents that we were living together as flatmates, of course. I really should learn to hold my tongue. So, feigning reluctance while secretly delighted, I agreed to Wilfred's request. Grandpa Quarrington would arrive tomorrow morning, which meant I needed to pack some essentials and head to Wilfred's place today. With such close proximity, surely I'd be able to win over this elusive moon of mine. When I heard I was about to cohabitate with my crush for a week, my best friend from the same neighborhood rushed over and handed me a small gift. She patted my shoulder meaningfully. "Good luck, darling." After giving me the gift, she scurried off in her slippers. Closing the door, I glanced down at the gift and my face instantly flushed red. But, as if possessed, I still tucked it into my handbag. The doorbell rang just as I finished packing my suitcase. I opened the door to find Wilfred Quarrington standing there. He was wearing light casual attire today, with 2 plastic bags in his left hand. I took a quick look. It seemed to be breakfast. Haven't eaten yet, have you? Wilfred handed me the bags. No rush with the move, have your breakfast first. Wilfred brought the suitcase and me back to his flat. I swear I didn't mean to see his door lock code, but he suddenly spoke to me while entering it, and I instinctively turned my head to look. I just happened to catch the last 2 digits, 27. There were 2 pairs of slippers on the doormat, one slightly larger in gray, and one in light pink. My heart tightened. Women's slippers in the house. Had he lived with a girl before? However, a moment later, Wilfred closed the door and said in a low voice, "My grandfather is very clever." To deceive him, I deliberately bought women's slippers, and even a pink apron in the kitchen and such. As he spoke, he bent down to place the slippers by my feet. "They're new, don't worry." "I see." I breathed a sigh of relief and changed into the slippers to enter. Wilfred had originally been sharing the flat with his colleague, but his flatmate had left for his hometown a few days ago, and he hadn't found a new roommate yet. After dinner, Wilfred and I began to tidy up the room. After all, it was a bit troublesome to create the illusion of a woman living in a single man's room. However, not long after I entered the bedroom, the light suddenly went out. Soon, there was a knock on the door. It was Wilfred's voice. The power's suddenly gone out. "Are you scared being alone in the room?" I wasn't actually scared at all. Let alone the fact that the moonlight outside was still bright. Even on a pitch-black night in the countryside, I would dare to go out for a walk alone. But as soon as he asked, I immediately replied weakly, "I'm so scared." As I spoke, I rushed out of bed, suddenly opened the bedroom door, and in the moonlight, I accurately grasped his hand, my tone soft as could be. "I'm terrified of the dark." Suddenly grabbed by my hand, Wilfred seemed to be stunned for a moment. "It's all right, I'm here," he responded, gently holding my hand as well, then pulled me to the living room sofa. "I'll keep you company here for a while. It should just be a temporary power outage, it won't last long." "Okay," I responded softly, but my mind was filled with those embarrassing flirting techniques my best friend had taught me. "Wilfred, what kind of girl do you like?" I asked him casually, while in reality, my heart was pounding like thunder. Wilfred didn't respond immediately. After a few seconds, I sensed that Wilfred seemed to turn his head to look at me, and then I heard his soft chuckle. "Me? I suppose I like girls like you." The night was deep, and someone's heartbeat was gradually becoming clear in the darkness. I was a bit nervous. The girl who once dared to stand on the podium in front of the whole school and recite self-criticism with a smile, now couldn't even muster a response. My heart was racing. To ease my nerves, I reached for the handbag thrown on the sofa, opened it, and took out some chewing gum, which I handed to Wilfred. "Have some gum." I was actually intentionally changing the subject, but after Wilfred took it, he didn't eat it for a long time. I turned my head in confusion, only to see him staring at the gum in his palm, lost in thought. In the moonlight, the tips of his ears seemed to have reddened a bit. No way, was he so pure that he would blush over a piece of gum? I was greatly puzzled, so I leaned in to look. With just one glance, I was stunned. This wasn't the new pack of scones I had bought, this was clearly the gift my best friend had given me this morning. My face burned hot, and my heart raced. My mind went blank as I quickly snatched the item back and stuffed it into my bag. I laughed nervously. "This is something my best friend slipped into my bag." After a pause, I added dryly, "Do you believe me?" Beside me, Wilfred's body seemed to have gone rigid as well. After a long moment, I heard his response, his tone slightly lowered. "What do you think?" The atmosphere was awkward yet intimate. However, the more embarrassed I felt, the more my bladder seemed to swell. I needed to use the loo. I thought I could use this opportunity to ease the tension, but when I mentioned it, Wilfred insisted on accompanying me. He said he'd wait outside the door. I patiently explained, "Don't worry, I'm not scared anymore." "But I am," Wilfred said quietly after a moment of silence. I was stunned for a couple of seconds, feeling the urge to laugh. Now I understood why, after the power cut, Wilfred had appeared so quickly at my door, knocking and asking if I was scared or needed company. It turns out he was the one who was afraid. I had no choice but to leave this poor soul at the bathroom door as I went in to use the loo. To avoid any awkwardness, I kept the tap running the entire time, letting the sound of rushing water mask any embarrassing noises. However, just as I finished and turned off the tap, the lights outside suddenly flickered on. And in that moment of silence after shutting off the water, I thought I heard something. Thinking about it, it sounded like someone flipping the circuit breaker. I quickly opened the door, seemingly startling Wilfred, who was standing rather formally by the door. He appeared a bit surprised to see me. "The power's back on," he said. I nodded. "I can see that." I could also see that the cover of the fuse box near Wilfred wasn't properly closed. The bright living room lights now illuminated all the previous intimacy, leaving nowhere to hide. We both blushed, awkwardly wishing each other good night before retreating to our respective rooms. Lying in bed, I tossed and turned, unable to sleep. I suspected that the recent power outage was nothing more than a staged performance, with Wilfred deliberately flipping the circuit breaker. The purpose? Perhaps to accelerate the development of our relationship? As for why he changed his mind at the last moment, I guessed he might have been spooked by my little box. Thinking about it this way, this usually aloof academic suddenly seemed rather adorable. The next morning, I was awakened by a knock on the door. Outside, Wilfred's voice was gentle. "Time to get up for breakfast." "I don't want to eat," I mumbled weakly, pulling the duvet over my head. "Let me sleep a bit longer." Perhaps it was my imagination, but I thought I heard Wilfred's soft chuckle through the door, tinged with a hint of resigned amusement. "My grandfather." I vaguely heard these words and instantly became alert, yanking the duvet off. Of course, Grandpa Quarrington had arrived early this morning. I quickly jumped out of bed, hastily made it, and rushed out of the bedroom in my pajamas. "How long until he gets here?" "I'll just freshen up, it won't take." Before I could finish saying long, I saw Grandpa Quarrington sitting at the dining table, smiling contentedly. Grandpa Quarrington took a leisurely sip from his teacup. "I've been here for half an hour already." I grinned sheepishly. "We were just about to come and pick you up." As we chatted, Wilfred emerged from the kitchen carrying a tray, still wearing that pink apron around his waist. "Go freshen up, breakfast is ready," he said in a warm, natural tone. For a moment, I almost believed we were a real couple. Grandpa Quarrington said he'd already eaten and sat contentedly with his cup of English breakfast tea, watching Wilfred and me have our breakfast. Thankfully, I have a thick skin. Despite Grandpa Quarrington's watchful gaze, I heartily devoured a large bowl of chicken noodle soup. Wilfred isn't just handsome, he's also an exceptional cook. After breakfast, Wilfred and I took Grandpa out for a day of sightseeing, followed by dinner before returning home. Finally, it was time to sort out the sleeping arrangements for the night. 2 rooms, 3 people, and Wilfred's room had a single bed while mine had a double. Playing the role of the girlfriend, I tried to sound casual as I suggested, "Grandpa, why don't you take Wilfred's room? Wilfred can sleep in my room." As soon as I said this, Wilfred turned to look at me. I kept a straight face, trying to appear calm. I planned to explain later that it was for the sake of our pretense. However, Grandpa Quarrington immediately vetoed this suggestion. He not only disagreed but also gave Wilfred a stern talking to, telling him not to take advantage of me before marriage. Then he tossed Wilfred's bedding onto the sofa, ordering him to sleep there. Catching Wilfred's slightly resentful look, I guiltily averted my gaze. This wasn't at all how I had imagined things would go. Evening. My plans had been disrupted, and I was tossing and turning in bed, unable to sleep. Just as the clock struck 10, my phone, which I had tossed on the bedside table, vibrated once. I opened it to find a message from Wilfred Quarrington. "Are you asleep?" My heart skipped a beat as I remembered how Wilfred had looked so uncomfortable with his long legs curled up on the small sofa. I quickly replied, "Not yet, what's up?" Wilfred's response came swiftly. "The moonlight is lovely tonight. Care to chat on the balcony?" My heart fluttered for a moment. So, was he finally making his move? I hurriedly got out of bed, tidied my hair, and used the small makeup mirror from my bag to apply some natural-looking makeup. I even dabbed a bit of perfume on my wrist, a clever little touch. Everything set, I opened the door and stepped out. As I passed Wilfred's room, I deliberately slowed my pace, afraid that Grandpa Quarrington inside might hear. On the balcony, Wilfred was leaning against the railing, his back to me. I couldn't help but swallow. Though we couldn't share a bed, chatting on the balcony and admiring the moon together seemed quite romantic. With this thought, I quickly walked over. Hearing my footsteps, Wilfred turned to look at me, his gaze sweeping over me before his brow suddenly furrowed. "It's windy at night." As he spoke, he took off his jacket and naturally draped it over my shoulders. His coat was large, almost completely enveloping me. Through the thin material of my nightgown, I could even feel the lingering warmth from his jacket. My face grew warm as I looked up at the sky. Wilfred hadn't lied, the moonlight tonight was indeed beautiful. I found myself lost in the view. After a while, I turned my gaze back, only to find. While I had been looking at the moonlight, Wilfred had been looking at me. Our eyes met, and I was almost certain that this man had truly fallen for me. But before I could wait for his confession, the lights in the living room and on the balcony suddenly went out. However, standing on the balcony, we could clearly see that our neighbor's house was still brightly lit. We exchanged a glance, and I asked him, "Did you pay the electricity bill?" Wilfred paused for a moment. "I just paid it yesterday." We both instinctively turned towards the living room, and sure enough, someone had flipped the circuit breaker. I was speechless. As expected from the grandfather-grandson duo, their methods were identical. I raised an eyebrow and whispered to him, "This tactic, familiar?" Wilfred responded, "My grandfather certainly understands me." In the moonlight, he directly took hold of my hand. "Clarice." He called my name softly, his voice gentle and pleasant. Surprisingly, I was the one who became nervous. Holding my hand, he got straight to the point. "What do you think of me?" "You're quite nice." I averted my gaze, deliberately looking out the window, but I heard his soft chuckle above my head. "As a boyfriend, I mean? Also, not bad." This time, Wilfred didn't laugh. The balcony fell silent. I could hear the sound of cars passing on the road outside the estate, the sound of the wind, and the sound of our heartbeats. Then, I heard Wilfred's voice. His tone was slightly stiff as he sighed softly. "Then, shall we turn this act into reality?" My mind went blank, and then my chin was gently lifted, his kiss falling without warning. Wilfred's kiss was inexperienced yet gentle, carefully exploring, but stopping short of deepening. This time when our eyes met, Wilfred's were filled with mirth. He then pulled me into his embrace, sighing above my head. "Clarice, I've finally won over this little troublemaker." I didn't have time to dwell on his endearing yet heart-stirring little troublemaker nickname. Because the moment he pulled me into his embrace, I caught a glimpse of a shadowy figure quickly disappearing from the living room. Oh, that Grandpa Quarrington. The next morning, as I left my room, I saw Wilfred Quarrington preparing breakfast in the kitchen and Grandpa Quarrington sitting on the sofa, looking refreshed as he sipped his English breakfast tea and read the newspaper. Grandpa was clearly in a good mood, humming an unfamiliar tune and, unusually, sitting with his legs crossed. Seeing me emerge, Grandpa smiled and said, "Clarice, dear, remember to come back with Wilfred during your next holiday. Grandma has recently learned 2 new dishes and is eager to cook them for you both." I raised an eyebrow discreetly. He must have overheard us, I thought. Just yesterday, he was still saying Grandma Quarrington, but overnight, it had changed to simply Grandma. Nevertheless, having successfully won over his grandson, I dutifully replied, "Of course, Grandpa." Grandpa Quarrington raised an eyebrow. "Indeed, it seems my precious grandson has proven quite useful." I thought to myself, naturally so. With your grandson's handsome face before me, I was utterly enchanted. How could I not be well behaved? During breakfast, as expected, Grandpa Quarrington began reminiscing about the past. Taking a sip of his hot tea, he sighed, "Of all the students I've taught over the years, you, young lady, left the deepest impression." The reason was simple. I was in my rebellious phase then, with a willful personality and impulsive behavior. I dared to do things at that strict school that other students wouldn't. And yet, despite this, my academic performance was still excellent. My classmates secretly called me a genius, but I wasn't. I was just a teenager, deliberately putting on an act. So, Grandpa Quarrington truly had a love-hate relationship with me, which made me particularly memorable to him. Grandpa clearly remembered my bold declarations from those days. His gaze moved between Wilfred and me as he shook his head and sighed. To think that after all these years, this little minx actually managed to snag my grandson. I continued eating without looking up. Actually, it was your grandson who used his clever tactics to win me over. Grandpa Quarrington seemed quite proud, laughing heartily at my words. He had booked a train ticket for that evening, saying he'd come for a quick visit and needed to rush back to taste his wife's newly learned signature dishes. What nonsense, I thought. I suspected this old man had clearly come to play wingman for his grandson. Grandpa Quarrington passed away, and I ended up staying at Wilfred's place. It wasn't a case of moving in together as soon as we started dating. As it happened, just as I was packing to move back to my old flat, I received a call from my landlord. His son was getting married, and they were breaking the lease unexpectedly. They refunded my rent and deposit, apologizing profusely. With no other option, I moved into Wilfred's place. It worked out well as he no longer needed to find a flatmate. We each had our own room and split the rent. However, I barely had time to enjoy living under the same roof as my boyfriend before another complication arose. My cousin Opal, the one who had stolen more than one of my boyfriends in the past with her curvaceous figure, was coming to Westminster. She laid it on thick, playing the damsel in distress, saying she was new to Westminster and had nowhere to stay. She asked if she could stay with me. I coldly refused. However, my mother, ever the helpful soul, agreed on my behalf. She had no idea about the things Opal had done behind my back in the past. She readily agreed and even tagged my aunt in the family WhatsApp group, saying I would take good care of Opal and that it was absolutely fine for her to stay with me. I didn't have the heart to go against my mother's word, so I reluctantly agreed. To be honest, I didn't mind her staying in my room. My main concern was Wilfred. I worried that this man I had just managed to win over might succumb to temptation and be lured away by Opal. Sure enough. On Opal's first day, she changed into a black silk nightgown with a slit up the side. I couldn't help but roll my eyes. Fortunately, Wilfred didn't seem to fall for it. During dinner, he only did two things: serve me food and water, and eat his own meal. He didn't so much as glance in her direction the entire time. After dinner, when I went to the loo, I thought I heard Opal asking for Wilfred's WhatsApp contact outside. Opal was doing it on purpose, not even lowering her voice. She wanted me to know that my boyfriend would add her on WhatsApp when I wasn't around. My heart tightened, and I quickly went to eavesdrop at the bathroom door. To my disappointment, I didn't hear Wilfred refuse. That night, as I was about to return to my room to sleep, Wilfred suddenly pulled me into his room. Without a word, he gave me a kiss. Then, satisfied, he smirked and looked down at me. "Clarice, your cousin has ulterior motives." I suddenly felt like laughing. It seemed this hard-to-reach man wasn't so clueless after all. At least he could see through Opal's flirtation. I nodded, looking up at him. "But she's very pretty, with a great figure." Hearing this, Wilfred's handsome brow furrowed. "I don't like her." As he spoke, he took out his phone. "When you were in the loo earlier, she asked for my WhatsApp. She's your cousin, and it was our first meeting, so I couldn't refuse outright. I added her on my secondary account." I raised an eyebrow. "You have a secondary account?" Wilfred obediently handed over his phone. I glanced at it and was shocked. It was filled with countless girls, all with unread message notifications. "What's going on?" Wilfred pulled me to sit on the bed and explained honestly. In the past, he had focused solely on his studies. When it came to relationships, he was awkward and stubborn, yet unable to refuse. So whenever he encountered a request to add someone on WhatsApp that he couldn't decline, he would use his secondary account. According to him, he never logged into the secondary account except to add people. Looking at the screen full of red dots, I suddenly felt an unprecedented pressure. It seemed Wilfred was far more outstanding than I had imagined. My cousin Opal has been staying at our house for nearly a week now. Wilfred and I are well aware of her little schemes, but Wilfred pays her no attention, and I'm quite content to watch the show unfold. One evening, I had to work late at the office unexpectedly, while Wilfred finished early. To be honest, I was a bit worried. However, as soon as I stepped out of the office building, I saw Wilfred's car parked by the curb. The air conditioning was on inside, creating a comfortable temperature, and Wilfred had even prepared some scones for me. "Hungry?" he asked, naturally taking my bag. I felt tears welling up in my eyes. Someone to pick me up, delicious treats, and a man. Not just any man, but an incredibly handsome one. I wouldn't mind living this life for another 500 years. On the way home, I subtly inquired if my cousin had given him any trouble while I was away. Wilfred's response, however, made me suspicious. He stroked his chin with one hand and said softly, "You'll see when we get home." "I'll see when we get home?" As soon as we arrived, I hurriedly changed into my slippers and entered, searching the rooms but finding no sign of Opal. I turned to look at Wilfred, who simply pointed towards the bathroom. It was then that I noticed the bathroom door had been locked from the outside with a key by Wilfred. Did Wilfred lock my cousin in the loo? Wilfred shrugged and went straight to the kitchen. When I opened the bathroom door, I saw Opal sitting on the toilet, completely naked. I glanced around briefly before Opal said through gritted teeth, "Please bring me my nightgown, thank you." Stifling a laugh, I fetched her nightgown for the first time ever. I tossed the nightgown to her, and Opal quickly put it on, skipping dinner and heading straight to her room. At the dinner table, I couldn't resist asking Wilfred what had happened. As he ladled some chicken noodle soup for me, he calmly explained, "I was cooking in the kitchen when your cousin was showering in the bathroom. She called out to me through the wall, saying her clothes had gotten wet and she hadn't brought a towel. She insisted I bring her a towel, but I said it wasn't appropriate." "And then?" I asked eagerly, taking a sip of the soup. Wilfred turned to look at me, his handsome face full of innocence, then she said not to peek at her, as she was going to run back to her room. I swallowed hard. She really had some nerve. So, I told her not to bother and just locked her in the bathroom instead. Wilfred spoke as if he were discussing something entirely unrelated to himself. But I found it incredibly satisfying to hear. It was karma. Opal probably never imagined that her tried and tested seduction techniques would fall flat with Wilfred. I thought that after this incident, my cousin would slink away in shame. However, early the next morning, she was up bright and early, with immaculate makeup, even smiling and greeting us. It was as if the person who had been pathetically locked in the loo for hours yesterday wasn't her at all. Fortunately, I had already informed my family that she only had 3 weeks to stay. By then, regardless of whether she found a job or not, she would have to move out. As the deadline approached, and Opal had been turned away countless times by Wilfred, my mood gradually improved. However, I never imagined that Opal would go to such extremes, crawling into Wilfred's bed in the middle of the night. That night, I was awakened by a commotion. When I woke up, the bed beside me was empty, and Opal was nowhere to be seen. My heart tightened, and I ran out without even putting on my slippers. The door to Wilfred's room was open, brightly lit. I rushed over to find Wilfred standing at the doorway, while Opal was curled up on his bed. Wrapped tightly in the duvet, her hair disheveled and spread across her front, looking utterly wretched. "What's going on?" I asked in a low voice after a moment of stunned silence. Wilfred handed me his mobile, showing me photos he had taken of Opal. "I noticed your cousin acting strangely today, and the lock on my room door mysteriously broke, unable to be locked," Wilfred explained, looking down at me. "So, I waited here all night to catch her in the act, capturing this precious moment for you." Seeing my confusion, he elaborated further. He had suspected Opal's intentions early in the day, so he deliberately drew the blackout curtains, turned off the lights, and sat in a chair in the corner, waiting. Then, in the middle of the night, Opal crept into the room in the dark and climbed onto his bed. Immediately after, Wilfred quickly turned on the lights, took photos, and caught her red-handed. I stared at the photos on the mobile, dumbfounded. Taking a deep breath, I returned the mobile to Wilfred and walked to the bedside. I yanked her up and, without a word, slapped her across the face. Years ago, when she stole my boyfriend, I was too young to do anything but feel angry and hurt. I never thought I'd return that slap years later. "Pack your things and get out," I said. Stunned by my slap, Opal froze completely. After a long moment, she suddenly sat up, intending to retaliate, but Wilfred intervened. "You have half an hour." If you don't move out, I'll call the police and report you for trespassing. Wilfred interjected, likely cutting off whatever Opal was about to say. She glared at him furiously for a moment before rushing back to my bedroom to pack her belongings. I stared at Wilfred's mobile for a while. "Send me those photos." Wilfred obliged, immediately forwarding the photos to me. I selected a few with the best angles, showing Opal in the most compromising positions, and forwarded them directly to our family WhatsApp group. I tagged Opal's parents. Next, I closed the door to Wilfred's bedroom and sent tearful voice messages to the group. And I kindly let my cousin stay with us, but she snuck into my boyfriend's room while I was asleep and deliberately climbed into his bed. I've raised an ungrateful viper in my bosom. Then, I sincerely recounted the events of the night. In the dead of night, the family group chat exploded. My aunt, driven by maternal love, argued that her daughter might have just mistakenly entered the wrong room while groggily going to the loo at night, and told me not to falsely accuse her. As I was racking my brains for a rebuttal, Wilfred sent me another video. It showed Opal's multiple attempts to seduce Wilfred, wearing short skirts or sexy nightgowns, only to be rejected by this aloof flower. Under my shocked gaze, Wilfred went to the living room and removed the hidden camera he had installed at some point. He held the camera, chuckling softly, "Now we can take it down." It was only then that I realized I had underestimated this academically brilliant scholar all along. With Opal trying different seduction tactics every day, although Wilfred always rejected her promptly, she always made her moves when I wasn't around. Worried that he might not be able to explain himself later, he had secretly installed a camera. I forwarded the video to the group chat and gave Wilfred a kiss. He maintained a stoic expression, but the corners of his lips turned up slightly. Upon closer inspection, the tips of his ears had turned a shade of red. Later, Opal's family was scolded out of the group chat, while I was informed by my parents to bring Wilfred home this weekend. My dad even sent me a private WhatsApp message, "Is this the silly boy who visited the wrong grave on Remembrance Day?" I couldn't help but laugh and cry, "Yes." My dad sent a smug emoji. I thought in the video that this lad looked like my son-in-law material. Under the urging of my family, Wilfred drove me home on Saturday morning. He seemed a bit nervous. Before we left, I surprisingly discovered him searching on his phone. Things to note when meeting girlfriend's parents for the first time. It was somehow adorable. When we arrived at my house, it was just lunchtime. My dad, leaning on his crutch, couldn't move around easily, so my mom put on an apron and went into the kitchen. She used all her culinary skills to put together a proper meal for Wilfred. My dad loves a drink, so Wilfred brought a few bottles of good whiskey and joined my dad for a round. The result, both of them got quite tipsy. My dad, with his arm around Wilfred's shoulder and red-eyed, said, "Brother, my daughter has been willful and stubborn since she was little, and her temper isn't great either. I'm sorry for the trouble she'll cause you in the future." Wilfred's face was flushed from the alcohol. "Don't worry, mate. I love your daughter very, very much. I'll definitely take good care of her." I was actually quite touched by these words, disregarding his choice of address. My mom and I sighed, deciding to let them continue their drunken rambling while we focused on our meal. That evening, Wilfred Quarrington was arranged to sleep in my room, and I was assigned to the sofa in the living room. Unable to sleep at night, I snuck back to my room, wanting to check on Wilfred. As soon as I opened the door, I saw Wilfred sitting on the edge of the bed, lost in thought. The curtains weren't drawn, and the moonlight was bright. "You're awake?" I quickly closed the door and walked over to ask him quietly. Hearing this, Wilfred turned to look at me, seemingly trying to recall his drunken memories. Frowning slightly, Wilfred asked me softly, after I got drunk, "I didn't misbehave, did I?" I smiled. Perhaps my silent smile made him a bit unsure, and Wilfred visibly panicked. He grasped my wrist, using a bit of force, and I was pulled into his arms. "Tell me quickly, after I got drunk, I didn't do anything inappropriate, right?" "No, you didn't." "Really?" Just, you clung to my dad, crying and saying, 'Brother, I really love your daughter so much,' and told my mom's sister-in-law, 'Don't worry, no matter how much dowry you want, I'll marry Clarice.'" I held back my laughter. "That's all, really." Wilfred's expression stiffened, but I couldn't help but be amused. This man was quite a treasure. Even when he was so drunk he couldn't tell people apart. He still got the relationship straight, calling my dad brother and knowing to call my mom sister-in-law. After a long while, Wilfred held his forehead with one hand. "I'm never drinking again." "Why?" I nestled comfortably in his arms, looking up at him. I quite liked it, it was cute. Wilfred looked down at me, his eyes tinged with drunkenness, particularly alluring in the moonlight. Emotions seemed to be getting a bit out of control. I pressed my hands against his chest, suddenly remembering something. "Who was that girl you had a crush on back then, the one you wrote all those love letters to?" Wilfred was stunned for a moment, then smiled. He lowered his head, nuzzling my nose with his, and sighed softly. "It was you." "Me?" Wilfred held my hand, his palm still warm. "At first, it was because my grandfather kept talking about you at home. Gradually, I became curious about you, and then I discovered that you seemed to have qualities completely different from mine. I was quiet and reserved, you were mischievous and lively. You could fearlessly do all the things I didn't dare to do, like standing on the school stage in front of thousands of people. Later on, every time you were criticized by my grandfather, you would secretly come and play little pranks on me, like letting the air out of my bike tires. Or putting small animals in my pencil case. I realized then that you were just a slightly immature young girl." Wilfred's hand fell on my shoulder, holding me tighter. "Clarice. Actually, I never thought that after all this time, I would meet you again." I listened, shocked and moved. Amidst my emotions, I stared at the face before me, unable to help but swallow. Now, Wilfred and I were boyfriend and girlfriend. And at this moment, he was drunk. I felt a bit restless, raising my hand to gently stroke his jaw with my fingertips. Wilfred instantly fell silent. He looked down at me, his eyes a blend of intoxication and love. Particularly enticing. "Wilfred." I called his name softly, and he responded with a low murmur. I reached for my bag thrown at the foot of the bed, and took out some chewing gum. In the moonlight, I looked carefully. This time it really was scones. "Want some scones?" Wilfred paused for a moment, then his tense body relaxed a bit. "Yes." He opened the package and took one out, giving it to me. However, just as I had bitten half of it, Wilfred leaned in and kissed me. The remaining half of the scone, along with the rest of my words, were cut off by him.